Okay, should we begin now? Okay, great. A very good evening to our esteemed panelists and our audience members. We welcome you to the Art Talks hosted by and organized by Northeast Arts Initiative. We hope everyone is in good health, especially during this very troubled time and trying time. Our world is continuously grappled by the pandemic situation, and we have also faced a lot of personal losses and financial losses as well. In addition, our world is also grappled with a lot of human rights violations um, and changing environmental conditions, to name a few, which have impacted millions around the world. But we hope today that our platform provides one and all with a safe haven as a community to voice our opinions and to have a fruitful discourse. So before we begin the art talk, the team at Northeast Arts Initiative would like to wish and to express our heartfelt gratitude to the overwhelming support and, and responses to our endeavors. We are a young startup whose entrepreneurs Nafisa Biang Khongwir and I myself, Afreen Kraipa Krem, are sincerely committed to to the study of visual arts, aesthetics, and cultural studies. We aspire to further our vision of a collective art community, especially in the Northeast, where art appreciation, art and cultural research, artists and art writers are given due platform to feature their overview of works onto an integrated space of discourse. So the Northeast Arts Initiative has organized a series of art talks beginning from today, the 28th of August 2021, till the month of October 2021. We have invited specialists in the field of cultural studies, visual arts, and aesthetics to present their papers with the agenda to enable a platform where specialists and general public alike can have a dialogue and exchange of knowledge. With this, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. In our panel today, we have Dr. Amanda Tongper, an assistant professor in the Department of English and Mass Media, St. Anthony's College. Her area of specialization include postmodernism, especially in relation to conflict and resistance in poetry of Palestinian poets. Dr. Christina Z. Zama, an assistant professor in the Department of English in Mizoram University. She has written well-received academic articles for which researchers and social workers alike have acknowledged her writing and cited her in their articles. She has translated several writings from Mizo language into English. She is a creative writer and recognized for her poetry, short stories, and non-fictional writing. She has edited numerous journals and magazines in addition to reviewing several academic journals. She has presented papers at a national and international seminar, and her area of specialization or interest is in cultural studies and conflict studies. Our third panelist today is Sir Rafal Wajri. He is the chairman of Riti Academy of Visual Arts, Shillong, Meghalaya, and a senior practicing artist. Among his several achievements are his theater as well as his cinematography. Our fourth panelist for today is Dr. Diarisa Rumnong, an assistant professor in the Department of English, St. Mary's College, Shillong. Her area of specialization includes Latin American magical realism, life narrative studies, and memory studies. She has a keen interest in folkloristics and theater. She is a poet, and in August of 2020, she recently launched the Speak Your Roots page, which is also an active Instagram account. The agenda of the platform is to provide a space where one can preserve and document indigenous language, cultural histories of Meghalaya and the Northeast. So thank you so much to all our panelists for being a part of this art talk. And with this brief introduction to our panelists, I would like to give this time to my co-founder of the Northeast Arts Initiative, Nafisa Biankongwir, to introduce our speaker for today and also to give a contextual framework of his synopsis and paper.
Good evening, everyone. So I will be giving a short introduction to our speaker, who is Bazik Thlana, and also about the paper that he is going to be presenting today. Today's speaker, Bazik Thlana, is a visual artist and an academic researcher from Mizoram, and he is based in New Delhi. He finished his BFA and MFA in painting from the College of Art, New Delhi. His MPhil in visual studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University and Masters of Research in Curatorial and Knowledge from Goldsmiths University of London. And he is currently pursuing his PhD in visual studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His participations in exhibitions and projects include Bedbug Intimacy, a project within the framework of 5 million incidents from 2019 to 2020, conceived by Goethe Institute or Max Muller Bhavan in collaboration with Rags Media Collective. Displays, curated by Pranamita Borgahain, which is a part of an exhibition, The Earth is Still Going Around the Sun, a culmination of the 3rd edition of CISA. Blurred Perimeters, curated by Wahida Ahmed, a collaborative event of the Raza Foundation and India International Center, IIC. India, Reworld. 70 years of investigating a nation, curated by Dr. Arshia Lokhandwala at Gallery Odyssey, Mumbai. C13, an exhibition, a proposition, a playground, a house, collaborated between Fika and Priyanka Chaudhary, Pomposh Enclave, New Delhi, amongst others. His practice includes painting and drawing, installation, artistic performance, and the curatorial. He makes artist books, zines, and comics, and occasionally writes poetry. So, just giving a small brief about his topic today, just so that we can get just to get an idea of what he's going to be giving us today. In the context of Mizo identity, a revisiting and re-examination of the institute and the canonization of Pasaltha is carried on by Bazik Thlana as he tries to establish new perspectives beyond the patriarchal narrative of the same, and towards a new image of Mizo identity, which questions the prevalence of objectification with gender. Reflecting on incidents from the general election in November 2018 to the recent Mizoram-Assam border issue, Bazik will illustrate to us this questioning of identity through artworks, photographs, images from social media, and literary material. So Bazik, I hand over the event to you, and yeah, I'll just make you host.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction, and also to the panelists and to all the participants. I see a lot of familiar faces as well, so thanks for joining in. I hope I'm able to incite relevant questions through this talk, as this is necessarily a venture to bring consciousness and awareness to critical discourse on the art of Northeast in general, and specifically to Mizoram for this particular talk. So again, I would also like to thank NEAI, the Northeast Art Initiative, for this exciting initiative. And as we had already discussed amongst ourselves, well, we share the collective urgency to have this kind of intervention on the region, which is long been obscured and neglected in the larger art national discourse. I know this talk will not suffice, but I do hope I'm able to do justice. I will start sharing my screen. As we are all aware, the topic of this talk is revisiting instead of Pasaltha, exploring visual identity politics in Mizoram. So I will start by explaining the term Pasaltha, as we have also many non-Mizo audience who might not be familiar with it, and going to explain its canonization and institutionalization by different agents, from state bodies to social organizations, its representation within identity politics, and we'll also try to illustrate how cultural values and ideals like this are revisited and appropriated and reappropriated constantly in the contemporary society in a bid to validate Mizo identity. So coming straight to the term Pasaltha, taken in its most literal sense, it translates to a good husband. So Pasal means husband and Tra is good. I'm well aware that tackling this term itself can be quite problematic because as far as my understanding is concerned, and I say this as a culture insider and asserting my identity as Mizo, this literal translation does not necessarily hold water in the consciousness of the Mizos, because this simplistic translation bears a much deeper meaning than the fulfillment of one's marital duties and responsibilities. It also means that the Pasaltha is the champion of the entire village when it comes to defending it from enemies and wild animals. I believe it is important to trace or examine this etymology, the etymology itself, to question the historicization, which might help us revisit and re-examine the very thing that I'm trying to do with this talk. So the role of Pasaltha can be better understood when we put it in the context of Mizo villages where geographical conditions place them in close proximity to forests and in constant danger of animal attacks. Historically, Mizo tribes were constantly at war with other tribes, either for land or for the defense of honor. This meant that they were presented with the threat of attacks from neighboring tribes at all times. This meant that the performance of daily tasks of working in the fields and everyday village life was not easy, especially for women and children and for households without an able-bodied man. Therefore, the roles that Pasaltha had to take up included that of defender, protector, and provider, not only for his immediate family, but for the entire village. This raised the status of the Pasaltha amongst his peers and placed him in a position of great honor within the Mizo society. The dependence of Pasaltha for the collective safety and well-being explains the fame and at times the legendary status thrust upon them. A village who could boast a number of Pasaltha in their numbers felt secure in the knowledge that they were well protected, and the mere presence of these heroes would at times keep neighboring tribes at bay. Mizo history speaks highly of the Pasaltha and their heroic bravery and acts of Tlomgaina, which is an act of self-sacrifice, which are spoken of with high regard till today. In fact, being a Pasaltha is something every young boy strives to be when he grows up. This is also one of the reasons why I praise Pasaltha as an institute. In the cultural pulse of the Mizos, we have a Zol book, which is more than a structure where every young man is groomed from wrestling to bravery competition to talk of warfare and legends, etc. It was an institution. I won't go into detail with the Zol book. Perhaps later on we can our positions and statuses that are historically and culturally held very high. Like for instance, we have the village chief or Valupa and Tangchuapa, which is also a very coveted statuses. But these were not necessarily attainable by most common folk as social hierarchy dictated these positions. However, any able-bodied man could strive to become a Pasaltha and gain the respect and adoration of the Mizo people. This perhaps is what differentiates the Pasaltha from other laurels that were awarded. And if we ask any layman to name a Pasaltha, Tawlhlohpuan and if we ask any layman to name a great historical Mizo figure, and chances are that he would name a Pasaltha. Tawlhlohpuan and chiefs don't often make the cut unless their stories intertwine with that of a Pasaltha. And even then, the protagonist is almost always the heroic Pasaltha. I'll stop there with the explanation of what Pasaltha is. You can next slide. Yeah, these are like just some of the examples that I can find where we see a lot of representation of of Pasalthas. I will now turn to how it has been canonized and recanonized in a bid to validate Mizo identity. We can observe this canonization both from the governmental agency and social organizations. I will also provide few anecdotes to better understand how the idea of Pasaltha has been performed, from political rally to post-internet images, social media war in relation to recent socio-political issues. As one delves deeper into the true value of a Pasaltha in the minds of the Mizo people, it is of no surprise that the most prominent and first multipurpose hall in Mizoram is named after one of the most famous Pasaltha of all time, which is Vanapa. Many of the sections of OMA, the OMA is one of the biggest NGOs in the state. You can leave the slide there, which is the biggest NGO in the state, OMA. And though we don't have time to explain its significance in the Mizo society, I'll just say that it's more than an NGO. We also have different localities in the state that have names of different Pasalthas as well, the different sections of OMA in different localities in the state. With the exception of a few like Sai Kuti Hall in Lunglei, most famous landmark halls and playgrounds in Mizoram are also named after famous Pasalthas. One would be hard-pressed to find any other public places named after individuals, with the exception of politicians. Of course, this is an entirely different scenario, as the naming is usually done as a part of a bid to gain political favor and to ensure the funding and maintenance for the same, and not necessarily to honor the person himself. The admirable qualities within the Mizo society and the ideals that every Mizo strives towards were deemed to have been embodied by the Pasaltha. With the passage of time, there are many traits that societal constraints and development would no longer allow us to emulate, like bravery in the face of enemy tribes or a face-off against wild beasts. However, traits like patience, perseverance, and most of all, the Christ Tlomwena, again, which is a quality of self-sacrifice and placing the collective before the individual, which Mizo pride themselves in. These are the qualities that can be practiced in everyday lives. It is perhaps for this very reason that Vanapa, his real name was Tangzatsinga, known for his humility of spirit, gentle demeanor, and his ultimate Tlomwena is the most well-known Pasaltha. The qualities that define him are the identity markers that Mizo themselves have. Okay. These qualities that define him are have become the identity markers that Mizo people have identified themselves with, making him a relatable role model. It is possible that this is the reason why the most prominent multipurpose hall that we have talked about is named after him, which is the Vanapa Hall. So in the context of an art talk, it is important to discuss the sculpture of a Pasaltha, which you can see right now in your screen. This is a sculpture of Vanapa, nature and reverence that Mizo people felt towards Pasaltha or Vanapa. Another criticism spoke about the way the figure was posed and pointed out that the way he held his weapon did not show him as an alert figure. Some even went as far as to say that the way Vanapa was posed might mislead onlookers as to what he represented. That is, all Pasaltha who were supposed to be imposing, heroic, and ready for action. You may change the slide. Yeah. These are the kind of images that does the rounds on social media whenever socio-political tension brews up in the state. The image of an imposing protector and defender that exhibit masculinity is how many artists visualize a Pasaltha. Images like this are, please change, often circulated and are used on social media platforms to mobilize public opinion and awareness. Especially on grounds of border and ethnic issues, we observe that these images are shared very widely. And I will try to provide two anecdotes to recent political issues where we see an escalation of this performativity. The first one is in 2018, just before the state's general election, when S.B. Sasang, the then Mizoram chief electoral officer, was accused of misusing his power when his complaint led to a transfer of the principal Home Secretary, Mr. Lalnunmawia Chuaungo, out of the state. Sasang had accused Chuaungo of interfering with the revision of electoral rolls of Bru refugees from Mizoram who have been living in Tripura since 1977. This leads to a massive online and public protest using text like hashtag support Chuaungo and hashtag Sasang out, and of course images of Pasalthas that are shared extensively. The actions of Mr. Lalnunmawia Chuaungo in the minds of Mizos earned him a status of a Pasaltha, aptly appropriated, although there were certain problems with many of the manifestations. Upon his arrival in New Delhi as a result of his transfer, he was welcomed by one of the biggest student organization, the Delhi Mizo Zirlai Pawl, with the Tawlhlohpuan affirming his status. So a Pasaltha with the Tawlhlohpuan is one who does not. Okay. This gesture also illustrates how cultural values and ideals are revisited and appropriated constantly in the contemporary society in a bid to validate Mizo identity. So the other incident happened, please change the slide, not very long ago. I'm sure everyone knows about it, the Assam-Mizoram border dispute that led to a crossfire between Mizoram police and Assam police, resulting in the death of 6 Assam policemen and more than 50 others injured. You can change the slide. Here also, we see lots of Pasaltha images, but escalated very quickly when the image and videos of Pirin Moi, a woman who fearlessly placed herself in the front line and confronting the other force and was caught in between the crossfiring. Okay, this is supposed to be a video, but it's fine. So you're sharing the PDF one, right? I've also shared the PPT, the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right. There are other images as well. We can see them. Yeah, I think you can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is a really interesting as there are contentious debates about representation of identity and what really constitutes the Mizo identity. I could be wrong, but one of the most common themes at academic discussions in and around Mizoram is on the question of identity. In visual cultures, we have observed that identity markers are excessively represented through our textiles and costumes. Questions and discussions on food practices have also begun to emerge through, for instance, artworks of Isaac Malcolm Pluanga and writings of Seri Changte, amongst others, but are still relatively very little.
No.
So the 3 packets there.
You may change the slide. An academician from Mizoram University, Lalnunmawia Chuaungo, we call her Lal Kiangte, also made a really interesting proposition where she advocates for replicating Mizo, asking a question, what really constitutes Mizo-ness, and that a repackage might call for an effective commodification of culture. She further argues that repackaging Tlong much like Ubuntu that originates from Ubuntu, I think that's the correct pronunciation, that originates from African philosophy, might be an effective assertion of the Mizo identity that also set itself apart from others. This explains the many different public opinions and debates about the sculpture. I'm coming back to the Vanapa sculpture. It is important to note that Vanapa is best known not for his heroic deeds and bravery, unlike other Pasalthas, but known to be a gentle, beyond understanding and a champion of Tlong. But how does abstract values like Tlong be represented visually? It is not entirely clear exactly where the status agenda lies with the sculpture in representing identity, because I will try to made up some of my observations on the sculpture. The features that stands out for me in terms of its inaccuracy would be the tangchua deer, which is the scarf that is wrapped around the head. Vanapa was not a tangchua and would not have merited wearing the deer that would have declared his status to the world. I feel that this inaccuracy should really be a bone of contention, as it is a wrong portrayal, and it is a disappointing outcome from a committee who stressed as hard as they did in their attempt to make the statue as lifelike as possible. Please change the slide. The problem of representation, yeah, please change again. Sorry, I should have told you before. Can you come down again? Yeah, there, please, yeah. The problem of representation and self-identification can be clearly seen here, as the tangchua deer has now become an identity marker of Mizo-ness. Its function and significance has been stripped and replaced with the role of displaying a Mizo costume, and ironically take away from its true identity. When placed in the context of representing a historical figure, the attempt to portray a Mizo figure with inaccurate identity markers have taken away the value of the art and the statue, as well as that of the symbol. Please change. Please come down. Yeah. The overt and excessive representation or association of Mizo identity with Pasaltha is also problematic. This is where my problem lies, since it is based on a patriarchal narrative. And I'm asking whether we can have a critical question on whether we can have a modern female Pasaltha, or perhaps do away with the word itself and maybe invent a new term that can encompass both male and female. So as we can see from the picture, coincidentally and interestingly, the wall behind the Vanapa statue is adorned with mosaic tiles representing 2 females with pointe, which is a textile, another excessive use for identity marker performing the exotic zero. They are not individuals, but simply typical Mizo women. This stark contrast in representation lends a critical eye to think about the prevalence of objectification with gender and the problems of representing identity with it. Can you please go back to the previous slide? Again, previous. Yeah. Okay, you can also come to the previous one. So if we go back to the images of, this one, and Pirin Moi, we can see not only the glorification of our act and a commemoration through reproduction in painting and graphic posters, and even commodified through t-shirt printings. I believe the question we can ask ourselves is whether we are ready to accept the opposite gender into the manifold of Pasaltha, or is it still displaying masculinity and other qualities attributed to a male gender? So in one of our interviews, she remarked, "Azam zamchu ponfen mindil ro karon supply charcharam," which basically translates as, I'm sure like everyone else have a better translation, but I'll try to attempt the translation anyways. Anyone who displays timidity or cowardice, let me know and I'll supply skirts to them. So I will explain no further, and perhaps we can leave the remaining discussion for the panels and participants. Please come back to the last slide. Another thing I would quickly bring in the table of discussion is the growing concern of a certain, as in more, next slide. Yeah, this one. Is the discussion on the growing concern of a certain political party which is making its way into the region, as in the Northeast region. After controversy broke out over the center's attempt to portray Naga warrior Raini Gaidinlu as an Indian freedom fighter in 2016, the same thing happened in Mizoram when an attempt to include another famous Pasaltha, Chuaungo, in its pantheon of freedom fighter heroes. Like in Nagaland, this was met with harsh criticism on the grounds of appropriation, and some of the big NGOs like the MZP, the Mizo Zirlai Pawl, and the MSU issued a public statement for the same. Scholars like Lalnunmawia from Patsuma University echoed the same sentiment as well. Indeed, as Indian nationalism and national identity took a whole new meaning with the current narrative of the ruling government, one is pressed hard not to question the politics of inept inclusion and exclusion. While the region that has long been neglected and excluded from any mainstream national discourses, this particular inclusion has a whole new meaning. One is left with no choice but to meet it with skepticism. 5 years or so have gone, and just 3 days ago, this is what the INPR announced. They announced a short film competition on freedom fighter Pasaltha Chuaungo on account of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. In my other inquiries through my research, there seems to be a conflicting identities displayed by artists from Mizoram, where we see both a conformation and an imposition from and towards statist agenda, and when left to themselves, we see a contrasting mode of representation and display of identity. The strand of narration about Mizos fighting the colonial expansion and the commemoration by artists itself is contrasting to the experience of colonialism elsewhere. I won't go much into details about all these things. We also have to, it's interesting to know that the INPR is the nodal department for some of the only active art societies, like we have MADS, Mizoram Art Development Society for Visual Art, and another society which is called the Mizoram Film Forum for filmmakers that provides funding for artistic production. The government initiative of forming this society was a revelation for many struggling artists, as it opened up avenues for artists to explore their creative abilities, which were hitherto suppressed by the museum agenda, which dictated the manner in which these artists work. Right, looking through an anthropological lens, as there was no other alternative if artists wanted to make a living with their artworks. This says a lot about the art market and the art scene in Mizoram also. It is interesting to contrast the self-representation these artists produce in the form of easel paintings against the state-imposed presentation, which compelled them to inhabit an anthropological space, perform their role as natives, and narrate their history and culture to appeal to the cultural outsider. So to that, I'll end my talk with a final question on how state agencies play in fulfilling the agenda of, a bigger statist inclusion, and questions around identity and representation, be it national, ethnic, or gender, and how effectively this is executed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bazik Thlana, for a very insightful paper. So he talked about cultural appropriation and how the Institute of Pasaltha as a whole and its very patriarchal identity is being culturally reappropriated into the modern context as well, and how it still affects largely the Mizo identity. He touched upon like this whole issue, I think, which is very relevant for the Northeast also. It's the issue of patriarchy, and I think coming from an institute like of a matrilineal institute, which is based in Shillong, which is the Khasis and the Jaintias. I think it's a very significant issue to also kind of read into and to also understand to what stance does the Khasi have some kind of matriarchal identity within its culture itself. And with this, I would like to open the platform to the audience members to please ask questions so that if you have any clarifications. And more importantly, I would like to open this discussion to our panelists. We have 4 panelist members. So please do ask questions and begin the discussion itself.
Afrin, Nafi, I think it's all right to stop sharing the screen.
Yes. Nafi, can you please stop sharing the screen? Okay, great. For all audience members, as of right now, because we want to encourage more of a discourse with the panelist itself, so the panelists can unmute themselves and ask questions. For all audience members, you can put your questions up in the chat box, or you can just wait until the panelists have completed asking their questions and clarifications and giving their insights as well. So we request the panelists to please pitch in and give your insights.
Hi, Afim. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Amanda.
Hi. Huge congratulations to you and your team. I must say this is a very wonderful initiative from your part. And congratulations to Bazik. I think you gave a wonderful presentation. Let me congratulate you on your artwork, especially. I think it is outstanding. But can we ask questions? Afim?
Yes.
All right. So I don't want to make you feel like you're sitting for a doctoral committee or something like that. But I'm just curious, since towards the end of your presentation, you questioned, the patriarchal, the deep-seated patriarchy in this institute of Pasaltha, right? So how do you think, Bazik, if I can see him in this screen, is he still around?
Yes, he's here.
Yeah.
Ma'am, he's here, yes.
Bazik, do you think your work contributes to the the canon, as you said, the canon of the Institute of the Pasaltha?
Okay, that's a very interesting
Do you
question.
mean my own artworks?
Yes.
Well, actually, some of my art practice actually tries to questions this kind of dominating narratives, be it or identities or representation, and I try to, like I see myself as something that's unconventional and really try to provide an alternative and a critic to it. So I don't know how well or how successful I am, but I do try to, stay away from that. And also, in fact, try to make a critic out from my works. Yeah.
All right, because I read your the bit of information that was given to, I think, your paper. So the organizer sent us the paper, and I read it, and I thought it's very interesting. And it's interesting that you questioned that towards the end, and you also, wondered aloud in the paper whether or not, the institute, either A, it should be erased, or B, it should be more gender inclusive. Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong,
yeah.
but I think those are.
Yeah, I mean, like, especially, when it comes to my artistic practice, I see myself more as an artist than an academician. But I think it sort of overlaps and intertwines very deeply because, also one of the things that I identify, or like I sort of, when it comes to my art practices, I always say that my art is about conceiving questions and to formulate new modes of questionings. So I don't necessarily, how do I put it? I think my art, and also even in my academic pursuits, I try to bring new questions and live with a question so that other people can join in the conversation. And because I never wanted to provide a solution or anything like that. It's just a way of conceiving new line of questioning.
Yeah.
If I may interject,
Okay.
so actually, Dr. Amanda, Bazik's line of work, particularly with his visual arts, has actually nothing to do particularly with identity or gender identity. And he talks large in his body of work because he is also a practicing artist. So he talks about this whole decolonizing this idea of identity itself. He kind of allows people to read into his works from their own perspective positions. He, like what he said, he kind of opens the discourse for people to read into his works from a much from not necessarily his Mizo identity cultural point of view. He kind of expands this whole idea, and he doesn't really talk about a Mizo identity in his visual practices, which is very interesting because I think even in Shillong we have this very problematic idea, especially among the general public, that an artwork has to have some kind of cultural identity or some kind of cultural sign that that this is a khasi, so I will take this kind of painting, or this is a representation of a landscape, so it's the khasi representation of a landscape, so I will be more invested to that area. But artists of this generation, including Bazik Thlana as well as Nafisa Biang Khongwir, are kind of re-navigating this whole issue of how an artwork doesn't necessarily have to have the very typical attributes of, of a cultural identity. It can have certain signs and signifiers of a cultural identity and talk about a narrative at a larger context, or talk about an issue at a larger context, but it not necessarily have to have strictly those kind of cultural attributes. And I think with regards to what Bazik was talking about in his paper, he kind of introduced the whole institute of Pasaltha as very deeply patriarchal. So he was kind of, again, Bazik Thlana has this, it's very insightful how he does his papers. Like I also read his paper. He has this way of inviting the reader to kind of question the system itself, or to kind of like, you know what, I think Roland Barthes talked about, multiple readings into a text, and especially in the postmodern context. So I think Bazik's work has that potential to kind of invite viewers to think of an alternative canon. So what he was trying to largely talk about in his presentation today is that what if the Institute of Pasaltha necessarily wasn't patriarchal, but it also included women? Why is it that we are only glorifying men and masculinity as a way to show that they are significant warriors in the community? Why is it that women are not being given that equal position? So he's kind of shifting that whole canon and approach, and he's talking about how we can actually change this whole idea of pasaltha, or the entire terminology itself, to be more inclusive of both men and women. Because I think I had spoken with Nafi also regarding this, because we also in Shillong we have women as warriors. We have one particular woman warrior, but largely in visual practices as well as in cultural studies, we only glorify men as the saviors or as the protectors of the community, and women are the nurturers and the providers. So he's talking largely about a feminist intervention into the Pasaltha institution, and he's also talking about how we can change that terminology altogether to be more inclusive of women and men alike. So yes.
Yeah,
I'll just add to that. That's that's nice.
and
But like,
one
of
thing
course,
I wanted to say also, and I apologize to everyone, because we do not have the premium version or the pro version of Zoom. So this meeting will again end in another 5 minutes or so. Yeah, like around.
So please rejoin again.
Yeah, so
Yes.
so
Bazik, please continue.
yeah.
no, I just want to add that, of course, like, my art is open for people to interpret, but I'm also very aware about misreadings and misinterpretation.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add on that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Can we have Dr. Christina Zama? Would you like to add anything? Because we know you are from Mizoram itself, and you have a lot of insight.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Afrin, there is, I think, around just a few minutes left. So I'll just kind of carry on with what I was going to say.
Yes.
I'm going to say something which is like a very unpopular opinion, and it would even seem like a total contrast of the intention of Thlana. All right. I know that identity politics and even postmodernism is like quite a slippery slope, but when you look at the institution of the Pasaltha, the historicity of it, the context of it, the function, the locus, the whole agency of Pasaltha, it worked for that environment, it worked for that time in history. So, if we are talking about patriarchy, it was very patriarchal, it is still very patriarchal today, our society. So in that sense, for that part in history, it worked really well, really beautifully, because I think Bazik also mentioned that in the first half of his paper, right? That they were protectors and things like that, right? So his questioning of, and your suggestion is that can it open up a space where you can have more of a feminist kind of an intervention with regards to the term itself. What's very interesting is on in the other side of things, because we live in the modern postmodern context now, and with identity politics and what the title of his paper is also trying to do is, with regards to that image of Pirin Moi, the lady that he mentions in the second half of his paper, a very important question is with regards to why does this particular image really, really work? Although he mentioned, the IS officer Chuaungo, literally we have moved on from there, and then now we have this image of this lady, okay, during the border issue. The reason why she's so remembered in the culture today, and because the border issue is still currently going on, right? And because we had this really stringent total lockdown, all right? So many young people who would have wanted to go down to the border to kind of participate couldn't do that. And then you have this lady from Waireng there who was in the thick of it all, right? So that is why she captured this collective, interest of the population. And so we see her image in t-shirts, and many people have bought the t-shirts, they wear it very proudly. I feel like it was a way of the public looking at this visual image, this very powerful image of this woman, and the population wanting to participate in that piece of history because they were not able to physically go and participate, right? To capture that history, to appreciate it. And so I feel like that image, that very powerful visuals, it says something about the myth making, all right? The myth making, the creation of culture, how culture is actually produced and things like that. And also because when, she represented that everyday, every man, every woman kind of a thing. She represented each and every one of us. So I think that is also why, in this very patriarchal Pasaltha concept was actually applied onto her, and she became this really iconic person who filled that void where, we needed a hero figure kind of a thing. So in that sense, the image, I don't think the people necessarily were lost to the whole idea of the Pasaltha, but they recognize that she is this woman. But then you also have this all-pervading sense of patriarchy herself also, like as a woman, even her language, the interview that Bazik was mentioning, like, so even she masculinizes herself in that sense, right? So I found that really interesting. And I'm sure like many other cultures too, like when I think of Asterix and Obelix, and when I think of Gaul, once, they have this threat of an outside person, threatening them, and then you suddenly you realize your identity, and, you become aware to these so-called threats. But then other than that, like the Mizo population in general is quite laid back and peace-loving and quite content in that sense. But I also wanted to add that, the idea that Bazik himself, because he's an artist, like when an artist wants to do his work, they need freedom. An artist studio is like a laboratory. If we allow that of scientists, why not artists? So I think we are running out of time, but in total, that is also what I just wanted to contribute. Right. I hope it is in line with the topic, because you're talking about visuals and identity politics and the Pasaltha there. Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
so much.
Christina and Dr. Amanda also for your insights. Really wonderful.
We are almost timed out, but everyone can please rejoin again using the same passcode and the ID. Dr. Dairisa Rumnam, would you like to add on or give your insights?
Yes, thank you, Afrin.
Just a suggestion.
Yes.
Why don't you just end now and then, use the whole new session so that it doesn't get interrupted in between. I think that would be much better.
Yes, I think it's better, Afrin, yeah.
No, we can't actually end the meeting. Yeah. If we end the meeting, then we can't actually rejoin using the same passcode. So we have to allow the meeting to actually time out on itself, by itself, sorry, and then we rejoin using the same passcode. So that's the glitch. Yes, Dr. Dairisa.
Let me just, so continuing with this theme of gender inclusivity, I just want to ask Bazik and even Dr. Christina actually, is there a performance of ethnic identity, especially of women, in art, in social media, in the media also? Is there a performance of this ethnic identity which tries to emulate, this concept of Pasaltha? So can you tell us a bit about that?
The term Pasaltha, because it was very male, gender oriented. And of course, I will also address Dr. Christina's remarks as well are really interesting observation as well. But I would also like to mention that, of course, like I do understand the historization of the Pasaltha, and especially, you know, when put in a cultural context of the past, you know, that was what it was. But like then my question becomes, why do we keep, you know, dragging that kind of a situation where we put, I mean, like, of course, a contemporary society is well different from what it used to be in the past. So whenever this kind of like issues comes out and you need, you know, this kind of performativity on social medias and, you know, through artworks, and you need an image of a protector and a defender, then why does the image of the Pasaltha always comes? Why don't we have any other alternatives? Is, I think, is what I was trying to sort of make a critic on.
If I may
yeah.
say, I absolutely agree with you. You know, in the presence of all our friends here also, I would just like to say that, you know, our Mizo society in that sense, we have these really powerful, you know, three triads. That of the church, institution of the church, and then we have what is what we call as Kotla, you know, the society, right, and that of the YMA, which is like this cultural institution. So they are extremely hegemonic in their power, and they control a lot of the of what goes on in society, a lot of the discourses and a lot of the narratives also. So when we have voices who do want to engage people in, you know, the larger, you know, context of life in general, or, you know, inclusivity or finding a middle ground, like Bazik himself tried to do during the elections in 2018, and his painting was removed and things like that, you know. So there is a lot of intolerance, you know, a lot of times when I myself engage with many of my friends too, you know, from the different fields, whether it is in politics or art, I keep saying, you know, like you need to grow up. Like, you can't let everything offend you, right? You need to be able to listen to the other perspective, right? So there is nothing uglier than a 50-year-old, 8-year-old, right? So you need to grow up, like you need to engage with society in that sense. So I really appreciated, you know, Bazik's attempt to actually question those notions. But at the same time, you know, it's one thing to be, you know, idealistic, and one thing to want that kind of a change, but you have to also be real. You know, I am not an artist, but I'm very much in support of art and the progress of art in say Aizawl city. When I go to all of these galleries and exhibitions, we hardly see anything other than, you know, the traditional representation of a you know, the usual rural scene, and maybe it's a way of the artist trying to recapture this pure Mizo identity, you know, nostalgia and nativist kind of a representation. But there is no sense of, you know, intentional engaging with issues that need to be engaged with. And it is the same thing, not just for artists, but even for, you know, with regards to sexuality, with regards to gender, with regards to race and things like that. So I think we do, in our society, we do have quite an uphill task. And that is why I just wanted to even thank your initiative, you know, like it is such an interesting thing. And I really hope that, you know, some kind of a change can come from within the artist society themselves. I mean, even I was talking to Bazik the other day, you know, if, you know, there are no artists who want to engage with, you know, with regards to the Aizawl city, you know, what do they see around them? You know, with regards to sexuality, what do they see around them? They do not push the envelope in that sense. Maybe it is, you know, with fear of reprisal, with fear of, you know, whatever. But you know, with people like Bazik, and definitely there are also some other artists who want to do this. So let's hope, you know, there is some kind of a change that actually happens eventually.
Dr. Christina, to add to your insights, it's actually a very important issue that a lot of the contemporary artists today are questioning that very notion of a very stereotypical, I'm sorry to use the word stereotypical, but it is true, kind of representation of, let's just not use the Orient, but representation of oneself. And I think this tradition has sort of stemmed from the past and from other art practitioners as a very typical representation of what we are as a community, or what represents that particular community, and also this whole idea of romanticizing landscapes and these kind of notions. So I think a lot of the contemporary artists, including Bazik himself and Nafisa Biancongar, are actually shifting their practice from that whole stereotypical imagery and representation of the self or the community to actually talk about issues. I mean, I don't know whether a lot of you are familiar with Nafisa Biancongar's work, but she talks about issues of feminism in a matrilineal society. So like it, and her representations are not necessarily stereotypical as to what we have been acquainted with throughout the years by many artists before us. So I think this is a very important issue that you actually brought up, especially in the art community, because we need to kind of have these critical interjections into our artwork. And this is why our Northeast Arts Initiative is very committed to this whole idea of that artists are not necessarily skilled. It's not about a skill. It's about a critical interjection. It's about a critical reading. It's about understanding the cultural context. It's about reading cultural theories. I mean, art is very much related to everything, cultural theories, feminist studies. And I think a lot of these artists are starting to do that. They are starting to move away from that nomenclature or from that, what to say, yeah, basically they're moving away from that whole idea and bringing in kind of new signs. Yes. Okay, is somebody, okay. Rafael Wajri, do you want to give any of your insights?
Okay, Afreen.
Yes.
Everyone can hear? Can all hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
We can hear
Bharat, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, Bazik, for your wonderful paper. Maybe my observation may not be directly, refer to Bazik's paper, but what I'm trying to say is the situation that prevail in the region and the role of women in society. So primarily, I see to it that the northeastern region as a whole, each and every one state is having its own turmoil and unrest that is happening time and again for so many years. It has always been there for decades. So in the ancient times, people used to rely on men to go for protection of the women, protection of the society, protection of the community, and all that. But with the emergence of technology, things have changed, and women have had a participatory equation with men. So it is no longer that women should depend on men on such issues. So so in that case, as far as Northeast is concerned, like I told you that this turmoil, this unrest that is happening, it's disturbing, and it does not give space for women to remain in the domestic sphere. So basically, it is when men were at a tight corner in dealing with what is happening in the society, then that the women came to sort of salvage the situation. We can take a reference for like what is happening in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, about the nude protests of women in Manipur. It has come to a point that they could not resist any longer, and they have to come to be to salvage the situation and see to it that men does not become the victims of atrocities and whatever that is happening. So this is few things that of my observation, and we could see this is happening in our state also. Whenever recently, just immediately after
Barafel, can you please unmute your audio? Yes, please continue.
Hello, hello.
Yes.
So that way, women are sort of compelled to come in the forefront and lend a hand to see it, because it is a universal thing that men always go to the outside of the domestic sphere to take charge of what is happening. But the women are always confined to the domestic. But as I have said earlier, after the development, advance of technology, things have changed, and women also have their equal share of participation in the society and in many spheres of activities. So that way, women have their own, like someone mentioned earlier, that there are women who are more offering the bosom of the heart to contain the situation, but there are women who display their masculinity to act like men and come in the forefront by like what is being projected. So that way, I don't see that there should be any differentiation between men and women. It is the temperament, it is the passion that the community as a whole came forward to save, the whatever situation that the community is facing in this conflict situation. So, in connection with the sculptures that Bazik has displayed, I mean, it is very interesting to note that those sculptures that have been done in your state, in Mizoram, it's fascinating because what I see is those kind of finesse that is being executed by the artists from Mizoram. It's I just compare with what is happening in Shillong, what is happening in Meghalaya, because in Meghalaya there are times that the artists are not giving a free hand to execute any work, and moreover, Bazik mentioned that that particular statue of Banapa costs around about 9.5 lakhs, which actually this is not happening with our government out here in Meghalaya. I have not seen any commission work offered by the government of Meghalaya that will cost so much amount of money. So maybe this also will affect their enthusiasm, their aspiration is being curtailed. So these are few of my observations that I'm trying to impress upon you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barfel. I think you talked about how masculinity, especially how women have to project this kind of masculinity in order to get some kind of solution in a society, where this whole in gender politics and in gender studies, we talk about masculinity and femininity as two binaries, and they're very, like, society has put this kind of binary and has kind of projected this from the time we were born. We have been projecting this kind of normalized behavior, like a woman should have this kind of a behavior, should work in this kind of way. And if a woman projects masculinity, then only she can be like considered some kind of warrior figure. So my question to Bazik is that we also have this similar issue. Is it necessary that a woman has to project some kind of masculine qualities in order to have her say in the society? Why is it necessary that we have these strict binaries between masculinity and femininity? Why is it that we as women cannot give our say without those binaries that are there? because I feel like a lot of men have, like, I'm not particularly trying to like target men, okay, but I'm a person who comes from gender studies, so I am very interested in this area. So why is it that we still have these binaries till this present? Why is it that we're still talking about masculinity and femininity? And I wanted to redirect this question to
and to add to that,
Yes.
Afreen, I wanted to also bring to this picture of if there is a need and if there's a questioning of the need for grooming men to become that image of Pasaltha in the first place,
exactly.
because it doesn't only just go towards the way of how we project women, but how men as a whole should be shown in society.
Yes,
Not
exactly.
only in the Mizos in Mizoram or in Meghalaya, but all throughout, and how it really struck me when Bazik used the word to groom men in this institution to become that certain image. So I mean, maybe this paper is not only to question about how women are being perceived, but how men can have, their own say in it as well, to be perceived or to not be perceived. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's to sort of answer that question in a very, concise and I mean, I don't think we even need a lengthy, discussions on this. I think it's all boils down to patriarchy. So, of course, men are groomed, women are, expected to.
I think, Bazik, from a very young age, I think a lot of us have faced this, that women are already groomed to be a certain way, and men are already groomed to be in a certain way. So, I think that is something that we have all normalized until we at some point realize that this whole identity, or this whole gendered identity of masculinity and femininity is actually a societal construct. It is not something that actually exists, but it's just something that was projected and we were made to believe that it is. So this is why this discourse is very important, like what you talked about, how the Institute of Pasaltha necessarily doesn't have to be patriarchal, but why can't we include women also, because there are a lot of women who have done significantly in history. So yeah, we wanted to like cross question that whole idea of why is there a masculinity and a femininity, and why is there such a strict binary that is still relevant till today.
If there's anybody else amongst the audience who wants to put up a question or just give their insights into this talk, we would appreciate
just another thing to add
Thanks.
here, in light of Dr. Christina's comments. I think maybe on the questions of the specificity of how the Institute of Pasaltha has sort of like emerged from the Mizo society in the past. I mean, the question that I ask might not necessarily be I mean, of course, there are lots of different questions that we can ask or one can ask, right? So maybe instead of trying to encompass male and female within that Institute of Pasaltha, maybe another question that we can ask is, why don't a sort of like an alternative sort of institute sort of emerge in the contemporary society? Can we have another set of, institute
alternative
where,
canons.
Yeah. I don't know.
It goes back to what Dr. Amanda had said about.
Like I'm not able to articulate it, but yeah.
It goes back to what Dr. Amanda had said about whether it's erasing the whole idea of gender itself. So yeah.
Dr. Amanda, do you want to give any more of your insights? I think it was very interesting when you spoke also. Yes, Dr. Amanda.
I think,
yes.
can I be honest?
Yes,
I
yes.
want to move a little.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Amanda.
Is it just my network?
No, we can hear you, Dr.
We can hear
Amanda.
you, Dr. Amanda.
If I'm being honest, I think want to move the discussion a little bit away. Yeah. No, I was to move the discussion. Okay, there's a lapse.
Okay, I think there's a problem with
Right.
Dr. Amanda.
So can we move? Can we shift a little bit from
Mhm. Dr. Dairisa Rumnong, would you like to give your insights?
Actually, Afreen, I don't have a comment as such, but I have a question for Bazik about the concept of Tlaumgaina. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Tlaumgaina. Is that a patriarchal concept, Bazik, or is this can we apply it to women as well? All that.
Of course, that's really interesting. Of course, we can. It's not necessarily things or ideas or that are attributed to what a man does, but actually every person can encompass this ideal. But then again, if for the sake of argument, we can also argue that some acts of clomweitness in the context of a society, I mean even in the social organizations like the way that this sort of like how the very performance of clomweitna can be, I mean, how do I put this?
Do you mean to say it's more entrenched in patriarchy? This concept. Besides,
it could be. I mean, like for example, I'll try to cite an example. So when a person dies, there are lots of rituals and things that are undertaken by the society. So especially the YMA, the Young Mizo Association, which has become one of the biggest NGOs in the state. Of course, there are like a set of roles that are set aside for men and women in this kind of things. Like, for example, a male has to dug up the grave, and the female would do, preparing refreshments and stuff like that. And there are a lot of questions around, who does better, who is more Klomngai, in the sense that, a certain acts of Klomngai by a male and a female is still differentiated in many ways. I hope that is clear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, after Dr. Amanda puts up a question, Dr. Estes Aim has raised her hand, so she can talk after that.
Yes, Dr. Estes Aim, you can ask your question. There's no issues.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I don't think I'll be able to switch on my camera.
Hear you.
Yes,
I don't think I'll be able to switch on my camera, but this has been a very, very fruitful discussion we've had, and I'd like to congratulate you young people on this fantastic initiative. And Bazik's talk was also very interesting. But I think Amanda was trying to say something about the fact that perhaps when we're talking now, which is a reflection of how fruitful this entire discussion is, and that is we have to move beyond what what Bazik has been talking about, because he has been able to generate a lot of questions and queries in our minds. And I couldn't help it, when Bazik was talking about the institution of the Pasaltha, I was thinking of the first Mizo poet, Muaki, I think, Mluaki or Muaki. And very interestingly, that in a patriarchal society, it's a woman poet who has actually instituted this whole idea of writing poetry, and she was buried alive. Mm-hmm. And even after 7 days, her poetry, the gong that accompanied her poetry could be heard all over. Now, it's ironic that it's a woman who institutes this in a patriarchal society. But what I like about what was said in the paper is the fact that when he was talking about the institution of the Pasaltha, he's actually thinking of women Pasaltha. And I think this is a good indication of young people. It's a good indication of let's talk about the young artists from the Northeast, that, they're moving beyond these confined spaces, moving beyond these cultural spaces, and actually thinking about women Pasaltha. But at the same time, Afreen was talking about Northeastern artists from Northeast India actually having to identify themselves within their own cultural spaces. But I think, Afreen, this is a very healthy, I find that this is a very healthy orientation, because what Bazik has done is, he has done a historical, his sense of history is very strong. Yes. And in order to find yourself, you've got to have a strong sense of history. You've got to be able to rewrite history. If you're a painter, if you're a writer, if you're a sculptor, if you're a media artist, you've got to rewrite history, because it's only when you're able to exorcise personal history, exorcise the history that has been written into you, that you can actually come up with your own history. It could be your personal history, it could be your art history, it could be anything. And I think in this respect, maybe I'm jumping from one idea to another, but in this respect, I think artists from Northeast India are still struggling with issues of cultural issues, issues of their own cultural identity. And I think this is a healthy trend, because, we talk about postmodernism especially, and postmodernism, as someone said, is something that is, as Christina said, it's something which is very slippery. It's especially slippery for artists from Northeast India, because many of them are we're still living in our own cities here. We can hardly call our cities. We are still living in towns. And issues of postmodernism, I think, is something that is miles away from us. So I think we are still trying to grapple. Many of our young artists are still trying to grapple with issues of our own cultural identity. You see the paintings of, last time you had, what's his name, Mario's paintings. Yes. He's still trying to, his signs and symbols are specifically Khasi. And maybe this will continue for some time until he's able to move out of it and find out what is it. Will he remake his Khasi identity? Mm-hmm. Is it opportune for him to remake his cultural identity? Now, these are thoughts that just came to me when I was listening to all of you. And I think, this initiative, it would be very nice, it would be very good if you continue with the initiative, because we need to have, as you said, critical interjections. And the interjections that have to come in need not necessarily come from the region outside. We have to look to our own grassroots interjections. I mean, how do we interject? What do we have to say in the contemporary art scene? Now, for instance, let's look at some of these indigenous writers, from Australia. What are they doing? They're redefining orality. They're trying to tell the world that orality is something that you cannot negate, and orality is not what you think it is what we think it is. And what they've been able to put on the public platform is a sense of the oralities that are still inspiring such people as these writers to define themselves by it. And I think this is something that many of the artists from the Northeast India, I don't like to call it the Northeast, but from Northeast India, need to look into. And we're already seeing signs of it. And I think, it's good, the creative and the critical need to go side by side, but always the creative always goes first, as Eliot says. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a tumble of words. But that's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Estes Aim. And I'll just read out, there's one text that Jerry wrote. The thing that struck me was the second last slide, where the sculpture of the Pasaltha is placed posterior to the iron spikes, but in front of a mural of female Mizo figures. Correct me if I am wrong. This, in brackets, unconscious positioning allows for another reading: the historical identity as the identity to be preserved or barricaded. The Pasaltha, the man, as the symbol of identity, but it is the woman who is burdened with its custody. However, when you talk about representing beyond the Pasaltha, or even outside of that lexicon for a society that is yet to come to terms with its anxiety as it relates to its historical conflicts and present relationship to the nation, what is your take on the pitfalls of representation that even if women become the Pasaltha, then the institute forces this representation towards the phallic or masculine?
Exactly. It falls in line with the same paradigm. Basically, that's what he meant to say. Like,
yeah, I mean, like we've talked about this, and I think that's a really interesting, observation, because I was talking about the juxtaposition of the sculpture with the image on the background, right, on the tiles. But then here he talks about the iron spikes, which is in front of this whole thing. So that's a really interesting observation as well. And of course, I also observed that, and I also believe that women are made to bear the burden of representation, especially when it comes to clothing and costumes, especially in churches or workplace and other things. We see a lot of this in photographic images as well, in paintings, of course. Yeah, I agree with you on that as well. The last thing, yeah, I don't know if I am able to address this. What is your take on the pitfalls of representation, that even if a woman becomes the Pasaltha, then the institution forces this representation towards the phallic or masculine? I think that's exactly what happened with the Pirinmoyi. Of course, everyone hailed her as the Pasaltha, but then of course, the institution, not necessarily the Pasaltha, but the way Mizo society operates in itself forces her to be, even show off her masculinity in many ways as well.
I would like to, thank Estes Aim, Professor Estes Aim. I'm so sorry, Professor Estes Aim, for her insights. And actually, Professor, we were talking about the same issue that you had addressed, which is, how one can actually talk about a cultural identity without actually giving so much of cultural attributes as we see in Mario's work, or something. Like, when one can talk about issues of cultural representation without actually giving so much of those attributes, of those cultural attributes. It is not necessary that we have to represent a Khasi man or a Mizo man, for that instance, with such of like his costume, and that would be considered as their cultural identity. But we can also talk about certain underlying issues, even in art, without actual representation of their attributes itself, or maybe taking certain signs and signifiers of that cultural attribute and talk about the context at large, talk about the issues at large. And I think a lot of the artists are shifting their direction in like to talk about an art practice that is moving from this whole notion of a stereotypical image of a person that represents a certain kind of culture and moving into more I won't say non-representational, but also abstract kind of representations, which is very interesting. Regarding this question that Jerry posted, I think it was very interesting because see, actually, Bazik himself only talked about this institution. He himself in his paper talked about how the institution of Pasaltha needs either to be renamed or like to kind of bring in a new dynamic or a new canon to this institution that incorporates both men and women as and not necessarily using the term Pasaltha itself. And I think this is very important also that Jerry talked about the phallus and masculinity and how like women have to be in this certain kind of phallus or masculinity to be heard also. So
I'll just say on the side, being an artist, practicing artist from Shillong, and with the whole question of cultural identity, the issues with it, and how I think for everyone here, we are still struggling with this issue and what is important to represent ourselves and looking for basically a visual language, because like we have the written language, we have the oral, but when it comes to the visual, I think from the start already we have to think about how we develop that, and developing a visual language. And the only way to develop a language is to go back to to where you came from, what is your grassroots, what represents you. So I think in the search for a visual language, going through all these cultural aspects and what represents the self and the larger self, like the identity of a Khasi or a Mizo, we have to go through certain things, and I think it's more or less just trial and error and finding our own way. And so basically it's even for myself, I feel, and for when we spoke about Mario's paintings, he does do his own he does make his own interventions into it through depictions of, suppose, Mother Mary, but wearing a traditional Khasi garment, because it, in a way, it shows his closeness, his personal closeness to the subject, and him being a Khasi, like that is how I feel he represents it. So in a way, it's everybody has their own way of seeing or finding their root, so to say. And I think we're all going in the right track. And the struggle itself is what makes us, I think. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for this wonderful, wonderful session. We are completely overwhelmed by the support and the response and the enthusiasm from everyone. It's just overwhelming, and we are so, so happy. And yes, I think Miss Estes Im, she waved, or do you want to speak, Professor?
No, I don't want to speak. I just want to, I put up a clapping hand because I just wanted to encourage all of you. It's a very good initiative.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.